out, and we are waiting to see.
You know, I like a good dress rehearsal. We can just take this from the top. We can do that all over again.
I think it might be going through now.
Oh, yeah. Now I see it. It just might be very delayed.
Okay. Oh, did we start at the beginning of the show, or is it? Folks, if you're listening on YouTube, we've been live over on D Live, and the stream, for whatever reason, was not making its way to YouTube. But it does appear to be there now. We are indeed, I'll just say again, with the great James Edwards. And just a very brief recap is to say that we are going to be discussing several things, good things, some positive things, some negative things. I am going to be on James' show, The Political Cesspool, a little bit later. But James, if you would like to say hello to the folks who could not hear you just a moment ago on who are listening now on YouTube, please go ahead, sir.
We'll take this from the top one more time. It'll be even better the second time around. But I am James Edwards, the host of the Political Cesspool radio program for the last 17 years and counting. You can follow me at James Edwards TPC at Twitter. But our internet headquarters is thepoliticalcesspool.org, and it is there where, as the great George mentioned a moment ago, we are doing a little double header today, a little back-to-back action. I'm on tap, and it's great to be on tap, especially during this, the most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah.
And Jason will be my guest a few hours hence on TPC there on those terrestrial airwaves. And we've got a lot to talk about tonight. We can talk here, we can talk there, we can talk anywhere. And we're going to be spreading, as the good book says, good tidings of great joy. It was a difficult November covering the three trials of interest to our people, I think, or at least three trials that I know a lot of our people were interested in, that being, of course, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, the case in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery and the McMichaels, and then, of course, the Charlottesville free speech trial. So we gave it a good treatment, but now that the calendar has turned to this festive month of December, the attitudes have improved as well, and the morale has been boosted almost just by the fact that it is now the month of Christmas. So we're going to have a lot of happy feelings on TPC this month, and I'm looking forward to that. We need it.
Absolutely, yeah. We appreciate all the other people listening on the non-YouTube platforms for bearing with us as we kind of do a reintroduction. It seemed like YouTube was delayed, but now it's all caught up. As I was saying before as well, James has been on tap a number of times. You could always search the archives, type his name into the search bar on the afterparty.tv. Today, as James indicated, we're going to be talking a little bit about goings on in the news and some significant developments, and also just some good feel family Christmas time stuff as well, because we don't want it to be all doom and gloom. Definitely go check out Jason on the Political Cesspool later today. It's a totally different beast than a live stream, as I was saying, faster paced radio. Anyway, so there might be some crossover, but that's a good thing. We've done this before where James has been here, Jason's been there. But we'll start with the Governor DeSantis of Florida using the term anti-white and how significant that is. What kind of moment, how do you put that in the context of everything else going on, and what does it give you hope for going forward?
Well, I'll tell you, I thought it was remarkable enough to change what I had previously in mind for my program tonight about midweek and dedicate an entire hour to it. And we're going to do it in 30-minute intervals with Tim Murdoch, who, of course, worked with Bob Whitaker, the former Reagan administration appointee, who was really one of the first ones to popularize Antiwhiteism, as Jason has now taken it and evolved it, and it's gone into a whole different realm. I think Jason, along with Tim, have been the two people who have really memed this into reality by and large. But Bob Whitaker was one of the guys that I first met when I started the radio program, a former professor, very much a conservative in terms of he ran in those Washington conservative circles, but he was always very much keen to realities of race. And then, of course, his mantra concludes with the phrase about
anti-racist is a code word for anti-white.
That's it. You got it. And it's so simple and so pure. It's really piercing. But for me, Bob was the first one to start talking about that. And we're having Brad Griffin on tonight as well, and he wrote something that I think should be mentioned here in offering some commentary about this. We've seen that Ibram X. Kendi, this radical anti-white malcontent, has actually had published a new piece in The Atlantic that cited the mantra as being the mantra of white supremacy by pointing out that you wouldn't call members of another ethnic group or race racist for standing up for their own people or having some sense of identity and self-worth. But of course, you do say that about us because you're not, in fact, anti-racist, you are anti-white. In his entire presidency, Brad writes, Donald Trump mentioned white people maybe 2 or 3 times. Trump only signed an executive order to ban CRT in September of last year, but nobody knew what it was at the time. And it had only been in the last year and largely since Trump left office in January that Fox News has aired thousands of segments on it. He writes in summation here, it has only been the last few months that the term anti-white and the great replacement has gone mainstream. Now, this is happening in France, too, with their newly announced presidential candidate who is really making waves, particularly on the great replacement aspect of this conversation. But now what you have here, guys, is even Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting all the time about how Democrats hate white men, which is something that Trump never did, I don't think, even once. But to your question, Ron DeSantis, when he went up to talk about the Waukesha, however they pronounce it up there, Christmas parade massacre, where you had this anti-white who we know was a supporter of Black Lives Matter based upon his own social media, of course, run his car into these parade goers, killing and injuring man, woman, and child.
You mean it wasn't a self-driving car? Just want to.
Yeah, I mean, if you paid attention to any of the establishment news outlets, it was the car that did it. The car decided to drive itself into the parade, and I think it was a great, to the extent that you can laugh about something so horrific. The Babylon Bee had a nice piece of satire with the car actually behind bars, that a picture of a jail and a car sitting in the jail cell for being responsible for these murders. But anyway, Ron DeSantis gave a press conference just this week, and he said the word. He said it. He said the media is not calling this what it is. And I know I had asked Jason if we could actually play the clip, and he said that there may be some issues with that with regards to YouTube's rules. But he's the governor of Florida, which is by no means an outlier state. I mean, this is one of the key states in the whole country. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, calling this an anti-white attack. And I think that's huge. And people say, well, of course, there are some people in our movement who can never see the bright side of anything. And it's always something to be upset about. Well, he's just baiting us. It's just bait. And we did see this with Trump. We saw some baiting, and we didn't see a lot of results in the way that we wanted to. I do think Trump was ultimately in that game because he showed how you could stand up to the constant drumbeat of these accusations like racism and or neo-Nazi. I didn't really call him an anti-Semite. Hard to do that when he was so slavishly devoted to Israel. But neo-Nazi or whatever, white supremacist, racist, bigot. He stood up to these things. But now it's gone much further than that. I don't know if Ron DeSantis is baiting. Probably, maybe not. Maybe he knows this is an issue that's going to be popular. And I've always said, once our issues become popular and become the pathway to success, all of these people will become true believers. That's just the way human nature goes. You have a core group of people who stick to their convictions on either side of the spectrum, but most people are just going to go with whatever is going to lead them to prosperity. I say that just about every interview I give. That's why I'm never despondent. I always believe that the dawn is right around the corner, because once these issues, and we do have truth and reason and logic and science and all of these wonderful things behind our arguments become fashionable again, you'll have people fall into line. We've seen it in France with this newly announced presidential contender that's running very well in the polls and actually running to the right of Marie Le Pen. We see it with Marjorie Taylor Greene. We see it now with Ron DeSantis. And to me, it's not even so important if he is baiting whites for their votes, just the fact that that's getting out there. I think that this is the point. I think the ramifications of this being spoken into the world by such highly elected officials really transcends what they may or may not do with it. And to get it out there to the people, that's where it's going to catch fire. It's got to be bigger, and this idea is bigger, and this truth is bigger than any one elected official or any 10 or 100 elected officials.
I think that might be a good point to get your perception, and Jason as well, I know has strong feelings about this, to what you said about people always looking at the negative and never being able to, of course, you don't want to be duped. You don't want to put the blindfold over your eyes, but to be used to losing and to be so in that mindset that you can't see. I mean, any politician is going to be doing the pluses and minuses of what they say and thinking about these, you know, their speech is cagey. We know how politicians work. But at the same time, for someone to say, just to say what he said, there's going to be a lot of blowback that he has to deal with, and the people in his state and who's around him. Even if his intentions are a little different than what ours might be behind closed doors, he's still taking, I think we still have to respect the fact that he's unfortunately, in the day and age we live in, taking a risk by saying such a thing. But the more important notion, and again, what I want to throw to you, and Jason, if you have anything to add as well, because it's important for the people who are coming and listening to this show who are involved in this, is to keep that bigger frame right, where you're not always, it's not this ink blot test where anything that happens, even if it looks good, no, it's bad, because that does something to your outlook. It does something to your sense of agency and choice and what you can do in the world. So any thoughts on that broader issue of always being negative?
Well, you see it a lot. I think some people want to be miserable. I don't know really what the psychology is to that, but and perhaps I'm the exact opposite of that. I don't know, maybe I'm too far on the other side, whereas I always think victory is inevitable. But I do truly believe that. I do think that we are going to turn this around, and I think we're seeing some tremors. The fact that, and by the way, if it hasn't been said before, if I didn't put enough emphasis on this before, I think both of you fine gentlemen should be taking a victory lap for this, because whether it will ever be, whether the proper credit will ever be given for this or not, there is no doubt that your work here and your work on the different platforms and the different programs on which you appear has played a huge role in taking the term anti-white and all of this wonderful vocabulary that Jason and you, Jared, have been cultivating. There's just no doubt that it permeates. Even if Ron DeSantis has never heard of any of us, even if he doesn't know about these broadcasts, enough people have said it to where it reached him. He didn't just come up with this term. That didn't happen. He has to know that there's a groundswell of support within the Republican base, and to Trump's credit, or perhaps to the credit of the radical zealots that make up the BLM and Antifa movements, for polarizing and radicalizing, and I mean radicalizing in a good way, in a healthy way, the Republican base. The Republican base is realigning, and it is realigning in a way that is much more in agreement. And we have polls to back this up to our mindset and what we've been talking about for a decade and 2 decades and on and on. But yes, 5 years ago, you would have never heard anybody mention the term anti-white that held an office like that. Now you have a top presidential contender in a major European nation. Now you have a sitting congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now you have the sitting governor of the state of Florida, who may very well be the next vice president. You have all of these things, and you didn't have that 5 years ago. So I think, it is plausible to believe that when I come back on tap next Christmas, we'll be saying, man, can you remember last year we were talking about just a handful of elected officials saying anti-white or referring to these attacks against our people as being anti-white? Now everybody's saying it. I think the day will come when we take it for granted that everybody uses these terms. I think we're trending in that direction.
Jason, I don't know if you had anything to say, or we could talk a little about this.
I was actually just making sure all the tech stuff was still working properly and we weren't having any more issues. So it looks fine, and Entropy is up and running okay now as well. So folks, if you want to head over there with any questions or comments that won't scroll off as they do elsewhere, you may do that. And again, you may financially gift there over on Entropy as well as Cash App. The URLs for both are below. Make sure you get your questions and comments in early to Jared and I so that we can get them all to James before he has to leave at the top of the hour. And so very glad to have James here. And thank you so very much, James, for those kind words. You're right when it comes to things like credit and hard work that people are at. And for years and years, it's very often hard to come by because there are so many people who lack class whatsoever. And, the fact that I've been using anti-whiteism and pushing it since '94, that I've started off with a pamphlet handing out at IRL functions all the way back then, all the way up into the fact that we have a second edition, iteration 2, where now we don't just have anti-white and anti-whiteism. We have Western kind being said, white erasure being said, which I also want to recommend for anybody who uses the phrase great replacement. That's something anti-whites came up with. And now we end up echoing great and replacement, which very often great is something good and replacement is something good. And psychologically, it is a powerful tool for the anti-whites for them to be for something called a great replacement, even though consciously we can say it is a negative. But yeah, it's because there's so few people today with any class. So very first thing I want to do is I want to congratulate and thank all of our teams that we have that are out there every single day, none of them being paid, every single day, and who are in the chats, who are on these different news forums and are using these phrases. And these phrases are picked up because they work for people. And the way that politicians, and James, you know exactly what you're saying. DeSantis did not make this up on his own. He wasn't standing there at the lectern and say, well, you know what this is? It's actually anti-white. No, the way that the politicians get the words that come out of their mouths are two places. The mainstream media, which is anti-white, of course, and that's why they say so many stupid things. And the other place is their staff. And their staff gets their information from two places: the mainstream news, which is anti-white, and alternative media. So their staff members are watching. I'm in communication with many of their staff members. They then take those words and they use them in their conversations with these politicians. And James, I don't know if you know, but we just had Mark Dice use anti-whiteism 4 times in a clip and then gabbed it as well, actually writing out the entire word anti-whiteism to over 2 million people. So, yeah, we're having magnificent success in the fact, exactly like you're saying.
Hey, well, there is one thing I wanted to say about that, and that is I'm sure that Mark Dice is going to be reaching people that perhaps we don't reach, and they're going to say, wow, Mark Dice, that's where I got that from. He was the first person to say anti-white. What's the first person they heard it from? And I get that. These people aren't being dishonest if they say, well, I learned it from him, so he must have been the first. Whereas, I met Bob Whitaker in 2003, 2004, which was only slightly before I met you, Jason. But of course, at that time, he was the first one I'd heard it from. I didn't know about the work you were doing, pamphleting and meeting, getting the word out there to the extent that we had the means to do so back in the 90s. But it is a cumulative effect. Of course, I guess Ronald Reagan once said it doesn't ultimately matter who gets the credit so long as that the work is being done. But for me, I recognize the people who have done a lot of good in getting it out there. And that's why I want to make sure, not that your audience needs me to remind them, but obviously the work you've done in the last several years, especially on this, has just been huge. And I think probably plays an oversized role in what we're seeing here. And of course, as you mentioned, it is the audience. It is the people, the 3 of us, the 2 of you. It's not happening if it's only us. It's happening because we reach people who are receptive to the message. And I got to say again, I think we give a tip of the hat to this guy, and rightly so, every time we talk. Yes. But down there, First Class, down there in Central Florida, I mean, there's people like that who support the work. And nobody, perhaps, maybe one day, but right now he's got a job and in a position where he can't be known publicly. But the support he does, the support he gives, and that so many others like him give, they're equal partners in all of this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. See, James is such an opposite of the vast majority of people today. They're classless. James is a class act. And white people, and I met with Franklin from the community, the White Wellbeing community, just yesterday. We were talking about this, that as white people, we give credit when people work hard, because the opposite is conservatism. I mean, I'm sorry, which is saying communism, conservatism. The opposite is communism, where you don't want to work because you don't get credit. Your efforts are not rewarded. And so that's not the way white people are. And so it's very important that we acknowledge, I think, and I'm going to say thank you for all of the teams out there and all of the individuals out there who have reached out. People reach out to me and they say, I just sent this comment to, say, like Mark Dice in his live chat. And then they used some of the key concepts, and then Mark Dice wrote back to them some sort of response. And that would be an acknowledgement of, obviously, that he read what they had put out there. And that's magnificent. So there are numerous folks who are doing magnificent things. And that is why we are beginning to see this change across the globe when it comes to societal conversation. And societal conversation changes, James, you know this, you can speak to it perfectly. As it changes, then people have to contend, they have to deal with new concepts, and in this case, concepts that the anti-white looks immoral when they try to combat.
No, I agree 100%. And I'd actually just like to repose this question to you, because this will be the first question I believe I'll ask you tonight on TPC, because this is a little bit more of your baby than it is mine. What do you think the overall effects of, are we giving it too much credit? Or are we playing too much into this with regard to what we heard out of Florida this week? Is it just going to be a one-off thing, or is this the sort of a trimmer for something bigger to come and something that's building?
You're going to see more from DeSantis. I won't say how, but you will hear some more from him. And we couldn't overplay. This is the concept. Anti-whiteism is the concept that slays the concept racism that defeated Western kind. That is the most important thing that anyone can possibly grapple with right now. There's nothing else that we could do more powerful than something that is legal, that is moral, that will enable you to keep your friends and family, unless they're radically, anti-white and they really do want to white erase us. But this is the most powerful thing that can be done for our people. And the more we can get politicians to say things like anti-white, anti-whiteism, white erasure, Western kind, anti-white narrative, the more we can get them to say such things, then the media have to try to deal with it. And so what they're going to try to do, and with this, what Hunter was talking about when it came to this disgusting anti-white, is that they're going to try to conflate, just like they've done with our stories. We have wonderful people around the globe. Same things happening in the United States when it comes. The reporters respond the exact same way in the US, Canada, Iceland. And the reason why is because anti-whiteism is the same everywhere around the world. The beautiful thing about that is that since it's the same, it only takes one cure. It only takes one skeleton key to defeat it everywhere it is. If it were different in different countries, then we would have to have a different remedy in all of the different countries. But they have set themselves, the anti-whites have set themselves up for defeat. And what we end up having is they attempt to conflate the well-being of our people. And this is why the phrase white well-being is so important, because the average family, white family, they want well-being for their family. And when the anti-white, like this disgusting so-called journalist, writes an article saying, well, white well-being, the well-being of white families, that's the exact same thing as Nazis. The average white family says, no, thank you. We're not going to buy into that. And James, James has a marvelous audience of wonderful people, dedicated people for so many decades. And James, how do you feel that those folks would respond in hearing that the well-being of their loved ones, the well-being of their family, on the basis of something that they quintessentially are, their race, is the exact same as being a Nazi and evil?
I'm glad you asked that question, actually, because you have been to some of my conferences. And in fact, much more than come as an attendee, you've come as a speaker and really did a fantastic job. So you know exactly the kind of people, the type of people who listen to my program, because they're the ones who are manifested in the flesh at our public events. Well, they're private events, but they are in public, in-person get-togethers, of course. These are wonderful people. These are the best people I've ever met in my life. They are tax-paying, God-fearing, hard-working, family-oriented individuals. And so the fact that they are equated with evil for wanting to survive and wanting to honor their ancestors and wanting to have children who will go on to celebrate and define the same culture from whence we came. That's a horrible thing. But as you said, that has been a more potent weapon against our people than any ordinance in the history of warfare. Now, there's no nuclear bomb or atomic bomb or anything like that that could do more damage to our people and to our spirit than this anti-white rhetoric that you were just describing. And so we need that skeleton key. In fact, I wrote a book about it, in 2010, a little over a decade ago, Racism, Schmacism, how liberals use the R word to push what was then the Obama agenda. But I said the exact same thing. Not in so many words as you are doing it now. You've taken it to the next level, I think, but we're hitting on the same concepts.
Yep.
And I was talking about it, and I think I wrote it, that this is a socio-political nuclear bomb.
Yep.
And we have to have the key to unlock it, or it's going to destroy our people. And we've come a long way since 2010. I am not a guy who is so naive. I am oblivious to the fact that everything objectively, physically, is worse now than it was in 2010. The monuments are coming down.
Yeah.
There's more censorship. There's more oppression. We've lost court case after court case. Yes, things have gotten worse in a way over the course of the last decade, which was, of course, worse than the decade before it, going back to the 1950s, and hell, probably going back to the founding of the country. We've gotten progressively worse. That's what progressivism is.
Yeah. That's right.
It's progressively worse off. That's what progress is. So yes, so we are worse off in many ways. You can point to them. We know that. But I think in many ways we are better off than we were 10 years ago, at least in terms of we are developing a mindset and a psyche that we didn't have 10 years ago. The monuments and all the things that are happening now, that was the trajectory. That was going to happen really no matter what. And the one thing that we could do is the one thing that we have done, and that's develop a healthier mindset that will serve as something that can take us to solutions. You have to develop that mindset before ideas and solutions will present themselves. So
absolutely. Really quick, Jared. I just want to say, I want to give gratitude to a few more folks. So I want to echo the gratitude to Bob Whitaker, also Tim Murdoch and their teams, who nobody knows their names of because the anti-whites control the world, and so they can't step out from behind the shadows. For their love for our people, for being destroyed. So there's got to be gratitude put there as well. And gratitude to the great James Edwards for all the work that he does. And the fact that James, and I know James is absolutely going to push back on this, but just believe me, folks, he is highly regarded, highly respected. He's a true gentleman. The entire white sympathetic sphere knows this about James Edwards. So James, using anti-white as he has used it, anti-whiteism, the rest, always a white positive guy. And pointing out that maybe before, hearing anti-white from Bob, not using anti-white, he was nonetheless white positive. He was serving our people with love, focus on our people, focus on our well-being rather than hatred on other groups of people. So James is a class act. And the fact that he's out there they're on the radio and on his different platforms now, using these powerful concepts that will empower every single member of our race, that gives it a credibility that it didn't have up until that point. So we're Jason, deeply grateful, brother, for that work.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you. As it is said, we belong to a mutual admiration society. I think that's something the great Sam Dixon had said when I was lavishing praise on him in one of his appearances. But it is overlapping, but there are some differences, some subtle differences, but it's still overlapping enough to where it becomes part of a avalanche type effect with regards to I mean, of course, when we first went on the air, Facebook had just come online and Twitter didn't even exist yet. That's how long we've been there. And then social media was really nascent when the people at Bugs, to go back to Bob Whitaker, who I spent a lot of time with before his passing. Bugs was Bob's underground graduate seminar. They were really, I think, the first that I knew of who were going out there and they called it a swarm. They were swarming social media with a message that was on point. It was a message that they all used. It wasn't hundreds of different people with hundreds of different sort of similar messages. It was one message, a whole lot of people, a whole lot of different places. And then, of course, again, what you're doing now with this new terminology and this new lexicon that's embedding our people, we're all doing, it's all very similar, just different enough to where it can catch people who may not come if it was also uniform. There's always somebody that's there's always going to be a segment of our population and our people out there that are going to be more attracted to one style of presentation than perhaps another. And we're like the Lawrence Welk show there on AM radio. So me and my beloved boomer co-host, Mr. Keith Alexander, the Great, as I call him, who, but I've always had an old heart. I'm the oldest. I was born in old age. So I've always sort of gravitated to that sort of approach. And there's different approaches. There's the more edgy and the irreverent approaches. And then there's just the more, what's the word I'm looking for here? What you're doing, which I don't know if there is a definition. It's just a little more exploratory, a little different. I mean, I don't know if anybody else is actually doing it exactly the way you're doing. But anyway, we're all doing it together. But separate but equal.
There you go. That's right. That's right. Well said, brother. Jared?
Before we talk about some good Christmas stuff, everything you guys said for the last several minutes, actually, it flows perfectly into something else we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about some of the anti-white things going on at this time of year, but specifically this new HBO Max movie for a moment, if you're familiar with that, or if not, maybe the commercials. But it actually, the reason I said it's a perfect segue is because as crazy, cringy as that stuff is, and we don't like to harp on it too much, especially when we want to hear about some good, wholesome family Christmas stuff from the Edwards family, is the fact that all of that media is becoming more extreme seems to me a consequence of the fact that more people are waking up, are throwing off the shackles of the programming, are using the right verbiage. And as you said, with verbiage comes concepts, comes a new way of looking at the world. So it actually speaks to, I'll sum it up, what I'm trying to say. When you said, James, things are getting worse, but things are getting better. Things are getting, you could frame it, what I'm trying to say is things are getting worse because they're getting better. So as more of us become more aware, then the media and the whole apparatus, anti-white apparatus behind it, gets more extreme. But in doing so, they're going to overplay their hand. They're going to show themselves for what they are to the average person, and the whole house of cards is going to fall.
Yes. So, well, first thing, to your point about this new movie called Santa Incorporated, starring Sarah Silverman and Seth Rogen. Our good friend Kevin McDonald and I retweeted this. By the way, again, I bring this up for any of those in the audience who have not seen the Ron DeSantis clip. You can go, and I know y'all probably retweeted it as well, but at James Edwards TPC, just scroll down to the November 30th set of entries, and you'll see the video right there. It's just a very short clip. You can watch it. You can hear it for yourself. But this movie, Santa Incorporated, Kevin McDonald writes, "Can Hollywood sink any lower? A Christmas animation clearly directed at children, loaded with F-bombs, reference to pornography, sexual organs, and tied with plenty of anti-white hate." So there again, Jason, right there, you have the very esteemed scholar Dr. McDonald using anti-white in his verbiage and his messaging. But so yes, this filth rubs people the wrong way throughout the year. But when it comes to such a sacred time as Christmas, I think it really gets under the skin of a lot of people. And that has been something that the left, never knowing when to pump the brakes, being incapable self-awareness, of being of going too far, maybe, or pushing things too far. This totally lines up with the polls and the trends that we'll be talking about tonight, and that we've been talking about all year. I think I have enjoyed this year in a way more than I did many of the Trump years, because there is something happening that you just feel it. Even if it's if I lack the ability to properly articulate it, I'd like to think that my finger is on the pulse to an extent that you feel something. There has been some science to back this up too, with regards to the so-called political stress levels, and we've exceeded the political stress level that existed in the 1860s, and there will have to be some sort of a reckoning for this stress to alleviate itself. But the bottom line is, and I think films like this, along with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, tearing down city after city and engaging in arson and terrorism, and for what? I mean, first of all, what are they protesting? Their messaging is corporate America's messaging. They are corporate America. They are Target. They are MSNBC. They're not revolutionaries. They're not counterculture. They are the man. So this idea that they're out there fighting against the system, they are the system's lackeys. So I don't really know when everything from our media to our academia to the courts to even the churches, any institution of power is in their tank. So what are they complaining about? But I hope they don't stop, because their actions over the course of the last few years, but especially since the Trump era, but especially since the summer of George Floyd, has caused white identity to surge, along with support for secession. Taboos are eroding, and our ideas, this is the point I think of the whole show we've done so far, our ideas are gaining traction with a much larger swath of the electorate. Normies have been radicalized to the point where they're storming the Capitol. Now, that's a whole other idea. Was that a good idea or a bad idea? But the point is, people are reaching a level that, and it may take an economic collapse before they totally get pushed overboard beyond the point of no return. But and I'm talking about this legally, but I'm just saying there is an awakening and an awareness that didn't exist 5 years ago. The Biden presidency is tanking. Democrats are staring into the abyss. Censorship has not dampened these sentiments. I think that's important. And perhaps the censorship has only served to fan the flames. But things are going in our way, at least in terms of the thought process of a lot of whites. We cited this poll earlier in the year. I don't know. I don't remember exactly which polling institution it was. I could pull it back up at ABC News or CNN or one of these major polling places. Asked the question of respondents. They polled only Trump voters, but this is interesting. So, but of the Trump voters, we talked about this. Jason and I were at an event a couple of months ago where he and I were on a panel together, and I cited this poll. This is a poll of Trump supporters. 75 million people. This poll is supposedly reflecting the thought, the mindset of 75 million voters in our electorate. And they asked if their opinions on white nationalism. Now, that's not even a term that we necessarily use for different reasons, but that was the obtuse question, your opinion on white nationalism. And 30% of the Trump voters, so 30% of 75 million people, said they had either a very or somewhat favorable opinion of white nationalism. Now, how'd that happen? That happened because of the left's lunacy. And this movie we were talking about that you brought up, Santa Incorporated, goes to show that they're not tapping the brakes, and we will not correct them from making their mistakes. We want them to continue to make mistakes until the time comes, I believe it's coming, to where people reach a critical mass and they actually understand that, yes, we are a unique group. We are a group with unique interests. And it's time that we elect people, and we demand representatives. We demand voices in the media. We demand that our elected governors and presidential candidates speak our name. Donald Trump didn't do it, but Donald Trump was certainly a stepping stone, I think, to what we're seeing today. And we'll see where we go tomorrow. But this thing isn't going to end. I think the next decade is going to be the most interesting and telling one. I guess everybody says that it's the most important presidential election of my lifetime. It's the fight of the century. But I think this next decade will, because of the demographic trends, right? This next decade is going to be make or break for our people.
Jason, you're muted.
I'll just say, yeah, 100% agree. This is the decade that's a make or break for our people. It's the Roaring 20s. We're going to make it happen. We're going to turn the corner. We're going to have to change the concepts and with those concepts, the context in which we live, so that thereafter we are in a position to continually, on a continual basis, recapture more and more of our destiny from the anti-whites. Otherwise, it will just be runaway downhill. And there would be one more opportunity, which we call the event horizon, where all of these different self-proclaimed victim groups and, of course, the different non-white groups turn on each other. That would be the final opportunity. But if we don't get it at that point, then it's over for Western kind. Yep. And that is something that we are just not going to allow to happen. Are we going to move on to some happy things in these final 12, 13 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's a good point to do that. And I'll just add, like James said before, there's different personalities with different talents and different directions they're going in, concurrent with, I guess, socio-political dialogue and elections and debates is because I myself am more wired as an artist. I look forward to some of those subtle things, which are in a way harder and in a way easier, but all the things that are comfortable to us in our arts, in our architecture, and the environments that we like. Just being able to at least acknowledge that the reason I find comfort in this, the reason it resonates with me, is because it's part of the cultural soul, the biospirit, and the sub-biospirits of the different ethnicities of where we come from. Why are we attracted to certain architecture and art and cities that, even if those cities are in a bad state right now, we still have a road. Like I go through different moods. And I'm in a French mood right now. I've been looking at, reading a little about French history and looking at French art and looking at things about Paris. Kind of happened randomly. It just showed some stuff about Paris on my Instagram, and then it kind of got me in the mood. But it's like, why does that look beautiful? I mean, we say this all the time. I don't have to say all these caveats here, but if I was on a national show where we had an opportunity, we were on Joe Rogan or something, is the example I sometimes use just because it's popular. Yeah, of course you have to acknowledge, it doesn't mean I don't think pagodas in Asia have their own beauty, but it doesn't feel like home the same way. So I'm looking forward to people realizing that. It doesn't mean you can't appreciate other cultures. It doesn't mean you can't have friends from other cultures. It's so silly. But at least acknowledging that certain music and architecture and ways of being, that's the deeper way to say it, are ours, and just be okay with that. As that concurrently happens with the political, I agree with you that the 20s, everyone, I don't like to do the crystal ball thing, but it does feel like I had this strange sense that and Jason and I talked about this on the New Year's show 2019 as we were getting into the Roaring 20s. And I've spoken to other people about this in a lot of different contexts, that in a very different way, and hopefully a much more positive way, it was going to be a shakeup the way the 1960s were. And I know people say 60s were a psyop. It's not the time and place to have that conversation, but I don't think everything is that top down. A lot of it was, but I don't know if everything is that top down. And even if it was, we can't use it as an excuse. Fine, then this will be the decade where it's a bottom up thing, and it's up to us. It's up to all of us, the three of us here, the people listening live in a replay. Having said all of that, Christmas time, the Yuletide, is certainly a time when we really feel it. I love this time of year. It is very much in our soul. And so we would just want to give you the floor to talk about maybe some family traditions. We know that you have a new member of your family. Just anything you want to say about what you do, maybe advice to young families at this time of year about keeping certain traditions alive and instilling this in their children. But let's use the last bit of the show to celebrate Christmas time. Tell us how the Edwards family does it in particular, and then we'll keep an eye out for any questions. Everyone, please do get questions and chats in, because we only have a little bit more time with James.
Jared, thank you for the question, and that's a question that I'm excited to answer. Of course, everybody loves this time of year, but I wonder if they know really why they do. I mean, of course, it's festive and it's become commercialized to an extent, but there is something that comes with this time of year that fosters a sense of community, a sense of togetherness, a sense of love and hope and goodwill towards your fellow man. And we actually opened up the Christmas season on TPC last Saturday, which would have been our first show post-Thanksgiving. It's difficult to start playing the Christmas music before Thanksgiving is past us, but we didn't waste much time getting into it right after that, just a couple of days after Thanksgiving. And I started it off by playing the old English hymn, Good King Wenceslas. And if anybody looks up that song, read the lyrics. And it talks about this young page who is going with the monarch to take flesh and wine, food and drink, to one of their kinsmen who lives a good league hence from the castle. They're going out to this blizzard in the middle of the night because they want to care for their brother and for their fellow man. And there's just something very beautiful, a beautiful message in that song that sorts of and points to and reminds us of our duty towards one another. And that's where I think the Christian spirit and charity, for me, comes to mind. It's first, charity begins at home. It begins with your family and with your extended family. And so, yes, we love the Christmas time. We love the songs. We love the carols. We love the lights. There is something very mystic and something very spiritual about light in the darkness. And then, of course, I think even above and beyond the spirit of the season, the birth of Christ for Christians and the Yuletide for others, there is something about this time of year that really sparks an ancestral memory. If you think about it, it was in these cold, bitterly cold and dark winter's nights in Northern Europe that our people became who they are. It was because that we had to rely on our ingenuity and our creativity to survive. You know, we didn't live on the equator where food was bountiful year round and you could be a layabout and you would be able to live. We had to sharpen our minds and better ourselves and invent technologies. And I think a lot of the greatness that our people would end up becoming was born in this climate. And so I've always loved, I don't know if it was necessarily because of that reason or if it was just something that was innate within me even as a young boy. I mean, of course, again, there's a lot about Christmas that you can readily point to, family get-togethers and the giving of presents and all of those things. But there's just something about this time of year in terms of the weather, in terms of the climate, in terms of the darkness and the cold that I think sort of harkens back to our ancestors going back over the millennia in Europe. And I feel a little more connected to that spirit at this time than at any other time of the year. And but again, the sense of fellowship and goodwill and giving is something that is very palpable, more so in the month of December, obviously, than any other time around the year. And it's something that we need to carry on throughout the year. I think, we always, everybody could say the Christmas spirit, wouldn't it be nice if it could last year round, but it doesn't. But during this month, we need to remember each other. We need to support one another. We need to come together as a community. And that's what we're doing. And of course, as far as my family goes, as I said, we just sent out some Christmas cards. They're at the top of my Twitter page. We put up some pictures from that day when we went out getting some photos for the card. My daughter has a voice recital tomorrow. We're going to be going and taking in some Christmas exhibits here in the local area, and of course getting together with families and different plays and different productions. And there's something on the calendar. Let's go. My wife and I went shopping last night. We got a babysitter, and we rarely do that. Once in a blue moon, we'll go out. We'll get the babysitter and go out sans the kids. And we have an 11-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son, and now barely over 1-year-old baby girl. So it's nice to go out and just be us again. You kind of forget how that happens. But we went out shopping last night, and I was going over the counter. I said, okay, we got these events next week and these events the week after that, and then it's the week of Christmas. And it was a little overwhelming, but it's fun, and you want to have you want to be with others. You want to be with people. You want to be with friends and family. And so I'm excited to be able to do that in my personal life, but also thankful to you guys to y'all. I mean, I am a Southerner after all. To y'all for having me on today. And there is still a sense of community that you feel on these live streams and being together with our listening family on the radio. So it's a not necessarily a poor substitute for IRL Christmas gatherings, but a substitute nonetheless.
We're going to have to get to the questions right away because, folks, James, as you know, has to, as soon as we finish here, he's got to speed off to his show, which you are not going to miss today, which, of course, is 7 to 10 Eastern. It begins the Political Cesspool, and you can head on over to the website, which is thepoliticalcesspool.org, and you'll be able to listen live there if he is not already on a station in your community. I want to go right to some of the comments in the stream here. Franklin saying, great stream and great guest. Promethean Healing saying, James Edwards is a pristine example of a champion for our cause. He is indeed. And thank you both very much for those warm sentiments. White Student Transmission, financially gifting $15. Thank you so very much, brother. That's over on Cash App. And he says, DeSantis saying anti-white cracked the narrative, and that equals celebrate. Indeed. Thank you so much. Because, of course, it's the narrative, the anti-white narrative is that, well, these people are always the victims and white people are always the aggressors and this evil monster throughout all the time. And by the way, just because the ear is always at the door, we're going to say that the driver of the automobile might be innocent. He has not been found guilty yet, and his motivations have not been determined by CNN. So we are waiting on the edge of our chair for whatever CNN has to say about the case. Tall Kevin here, financially gifting $10 with a joke for James, asks whether or not your Confederate ancestor resembled you. I'll tell you this, Kevin, if he did, he'd be a handsome gentleman. But Kevin, of course, ever the jokester, wants to know if he was also clean shaven on top of his head. And if so, did that alert enemy snipers to his presence, or did it blind him from the blind the snipers with the glare? He says, just kidding. He really enjoys TPC, the TPC is in specific, the episode about the USS Liberty attack. Very informative, he says. Did you have anything you want to say to that, James?
Well, I remember the USS Liberty show we did earlier this summer. The survivors of that attack had a reunion, and we were able to have a correspondent go down there, and I was in the studio as I would normally be, but our correspondent was there at the event with them. So it was basically like being there live. So that was a fun show. We've had a lot of fun shows this year. I think this year, as much as any in recent years, we've had a nice synthesis of regular mainstay guests like your Jared Taylors, like your Kevin McDonald's and your Jason Köhnes and your Tim Murdochs and your Brad Griffins and people like that, Sam Dixon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You start naming them, you're going to forget about 20 that you meant to mention.
Yeah.
But we've had a lot of new guests this year, people making debut appearances this year, and I think more this year than any in recent years. So it's been fun, but that was a fun show. We've done some live broadcast, of course, Jason, as you'll remember, being in South Carolina earlier this summer, and what a magnificent event that was. And you said something that day that I'll carry with me and that I use anytime I go on some of these appearances or do something where I'm giving a talk in person, that when the river is allowed to flow naturally, it leads back to our people. And our people had the opportunity to come to that event in South Carolina. You just saw the wonder that our people can be and how healthy our people can be if given the opportunity and it's not suppressed and rerouted and diverted and subverted.
That's right.
But with regards to my Confederate ancestor, I would say this. This is a joke I like to tell. It's not a joke. I descended from the only private in the Confederate Army. Everybody else that I talked to descended from a general or something like that. I actually descended from the only private in the entire Confederate Army, so I'm very proud about that.
Well, mine was a cavalryman, so because he had a horse, so it was essentially the same thing. He had a horse to put underneath the private. We have 3 more financial gifts I want to get to quick before we let you go. JK160 financially gifting $10. He says Trump retweeting anti-white set up DeSantis saying anti-white. I'm confident Trump will say anti-white soon, as well as other Republican presidential candidates. Maybe so, brother. We really appreciate your financial gift in that comment. We have Johnny financially gifting $10. Thank you so much. He says, thank you, gentlemen, for all your efforts and the entertaining show. You are most welcome, Johnny. Thank you for that. And the great Sakis here, financially gifting $3. He says, do you think that most white people are aware to some degree of the anti-whiteism going on in our societies, but they are just too comfortable and cowardly to do anything about it? James, that's your question. And once you finish it, please give us your locations where folks can find you, and then we'll let you go so that you can get to your show.
I want to first of all thank you and Jared again for having me on. It's always an honor, and I always look forward to these opportunities to come and be with you all here, and of course have you over at my place, which we're going to be doing for supper tonight, as it were. But it's a great question and a great one to finish on. I don't know exactly the number of whites percentage-wise, and we have to remember there is a big difference between urban whites and rural whites, not just here in the South, but across the country. I was talking about this with Ramsey Paul when I was on his live stream a few days ago. Even in places like Oregon, most of the counties in Oregon are red. You just have metropolitan centers like Portland bringing down the whole state. So there's a difference between rural and urban that I think needs to be remembered. So I don't know exactly the percentage of our people who would fundamentally align with us, even if it's implicit or even if it's subconscious, versus those who are completely beyond redemption that we might see in an Antifa horde. But I will say this, just based upon that one poll alone, you're looking at 30% of 75 million. We have the numbers to win with now. It's just the numbers are not the problem. There are enough people who think like us as we sit here broadcasting on this live stream in real time to turn the rudder and to take back America, or whatever you want to say. What has not happened yet is the opportunity for them to do so. They are still certainly a little bit too comfortable, a little bit too content. And when they get a little more uncomfortable, I think, and more are joining the ranks every day as you see this total anarchy on the streets of places like Portland, thanks to Antifa and people walking around courthouses and some of these trials threatening death, and not so subtly, I might add. And people see, people notice things. I think a lot more people are noticing things than you think, and the suppression and the censorship plays a little bit of a role in keeping them from being a little more outspoken. But I wonder if, because they have not had that opportunity to vent, that as they continue to simmer, well, that may play better into our hands a little bit later on than if they had some sort of a healthy way to release the tension. We'll see. But I think it's, I do know this, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I think we're going to be okay. But history is certainly not yet written, and history can change on a dime, and it doesn't just flow in a nice, smooth stream in one direction into the rest of time. Things can change, things will change, and things will change for our people. I don't think we're going to exit the stage of history as these simpering suckers like so many of our people have been. And that number is dwindling, by the way.
Amen to that. Beautifully said. Ladies and gentlemen, this mind and of this gentleman here, James Edwards, and his character, they scintillate like the best of Christmas lights that you'll see this season. Think of him every time you look at a home beautifully decorated or a tree beautifully decorated. And when you see a family gathered around the tree, think of James Edwards and his family. He has been such a shining example of he and his family and his community. His parents, wonderful people. They are an example of how we should all behave. Over here on D Live and on Odysee and places we're seeing folks, they're writing things like NWG here, NW Guilt here, writing, wow, amazing. We love you, James. And so you are a favorite, brother. Much love to you and your family. We'll let you go right now, and we'll wrap up the show after you go so you can head on over and get prepared for your show. Folks, every single person get over there and listen to from beginning to end. I'll be there at 8:30 Eastern time.
Where is it, James?
We'll have a great chat there. James, where can folks find it? We'll let you go.
You want to see a picture of the family at James Edwards TPC on Twitter, but the one-stop shop for everything I'm doing on the radio is thepoliticalcesspool.org. Thepoliticalcesspool.org. Got a great triumvirate tonight with Jason and Tim Murdoch and Brad Griffin, three of our favorites and mainstays. And yes, you know, we did the night of Thanksgiving. we started putting up the tree, and everything is festooned in red and green. And even I have my red sweater on and my green solo cup. Yeah, they don't have a song about the green solo cup yet, but you know, so we have the Christmas spirit abounds here at the Edwards home. So thank you so much, guys, again.
Thank you.
And Jason, we'll talk to you soon on the radio in just a couple of hours.
All right, brother. Have a good trip. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Love you guys. Talk to you later.
Good night. All right. That was the great James Edwards, folks. And I'll take a quick look to see. Jared, did you have any thoughts on anything that any of the financial gifts that I just read? I'll look for some more to see if there's anything we've missed. And then any thoughts on anything that James said there toward the end?
Well, one thing that stuck out is I like the idea that history is not inevitable. They want you to think that it is. But he said something about that with the river flowing, however he put it. Nothing's inevitable. And our actions and thoughts and energies that we're putting out now are affecting things. So always remember that. Yeah. And on the topic of what we were talking about in the latter part of the show, I think I'd just like to encourage people, like we always do in the chat over this next month, the whole month of December, if you want to share some Christmas, Yuletide traditions, things that you do with your family, or just good memories, definitely put that into the chat. Be sharing that with all of us, and we'll try to keep an eye on that so that we can share it with all of us here. We'll all inspire each other, but it's another way to celebrate the time. There might be some different shades and variations about how things are celebrated in different regions. Certainly, if you're in a country outside of the United States, would love to hear some Christmas memories or favorite things about the season for you as well. So keep that in mind. Whole month of December on tap. Share with us all of your Christmas goodness.
Amen to that, brother. Well, folks, it's been a magnificent tap, as it always is. We always seem to hit home runs here. But I want to thank everybody who financially gifted, everybody who participated in the conversation, all the wallflowers as well, those who are watching live and in replay, and of course, our magnificent moderators. I know we had Fernell here. Did we have anybody else moderating? If I missed them, I apologize. But a big thank you to you if you did moderate. But yeah, this is the Christmas season. Be excited about that. Show love. Maybe when you confront an anti-white, whether it's a family member or coworker or whatever, in this time of year, be a little bit on the softer side. Say, are you sure you want to hold that position? It's pretty damn anti-white, and I know you're better than that. So celebrate the cheer, whether it's Christmas or Yule. We love you all, and we look forward to seeing you again right here on